She was a virgin, but carried in her eyes a restlessness she herself could not understand. He was a millionaire marked by a tragedy that turned him into a lone wolf. If you like love and romance stories, watch until the end, subscribe to this channel and leave your comment saying where you are listening from. We'll continue. The sky over San Francisco was heavy with clouds when Ellie Morgan stepped off the bus at the corner of Pine Street. Her hands trembled slightly as she held her small, worn leather suitcase and the yellowed envelope she had kept for 3 months. 22 years old, brown hair tied in a simple bun, modest clothes that hid curves she preferred not to display. To anyone's eyes, she was just another young woman from a small town looking for work in the big city. But Ellie Morgan carried a purpose that burned in her chest like smoldering embers. The Cameron mansion stood imposingly at the end of the street, surrounded by high walls and wrought iron gates. It was a construction from the 1940s, with architecture that mixed European influences and traces of American colonial style. The dark windows seemed like empty eyes observing anyone who dared to approach. Ellie took a deep breath and pressed the intercom, feeling her heart race, when a deep, impersonal voice answered from the other side. "I'm here for the housekeeper position," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm Ellie Morgan." The gate opened with a metallic creak that echoed like a warning. Ellie walked along the path of irregular stones, flanked by gardens that once were exuberant, but now seemed abandoned to their own fate. Wild roses grew uncontrolled, thorns intertwined with ivy that climbed the mansion walls like desperate fingers, trying to escape. Hope, the head housekeeper, received her at the back entrance. She was a 60-year-old woman, grey hair pulled back in a tight bun, small, suspicious eyes that seemed to X-ray the soul of whoever she looked at. "You're very young," was the first thing she said, examining Ellie from head to toe. "Mr. Cameron doesn't like young housekeepers. I really need this job," Ellie responded with sincerity she didn't need to fake. "I came from Riverside. My mother died 6 months ago, and I don't have anyone else." Hope sighed, as if recognizing something familiar and painful in the young woman. "Follow me, I'll show you your quarters. You'll work mainly on the upper floors. Mr. Cameron rarely goes up there. He prefers to stay in his office or the library on the ground floor." They climbed a wooden staircase that creaked under their feet. The second-floor corridor was long and dark, illuminated only by some old lamps that created dancing shadows on the walls. Ellie counted 7 doors, all closed. Hope stopped in front of the last one. "This will be your room. Shared bathroom at the end of the hall. Work starts at 6 in the morning, day off on Sundays. Absolute silence after 10 at night. Mr. Cameron values his privacy above all else." Ellie nodded, but a question burned on her tongue. "Does he live alone?" "Completely alone," Hope answered, and there was something in the way she said it that made Ellie shudder. "He doesn't receive visitors, doesn't leave the house except for unavoidable business. He's a complicated man." When she was alone, Ellie sat on the narrow bed and opened the envelope she carried like a talisman. Her mother's trembling handwriting, written a few days before she died, danced before her eyes once more. "My daughter, there are things about my past I never had the courage to tell you. David Cameron was the man I loved before your father. He promised he would leave his wife for me, but abandoned me when he discovered I was pregnant by another man. His brother Andrew sought me out afterward, said terrible things about me to David. He lied, destroyed everything. David never knew the truth, but Andrew knew you weren't his daughter. That's why I married your father so quickly. Ellie, my darling, don't seek revenge. But if one day you want to know the truth about your origin, it's in that house." Ellie carefully folded the letter and put it away again. She wasn't sure if she believed everything her mother had written in the last deliriums of her illness, but she needed to find out. She needed to look into the eyes of the man who might be her biological father and understand what really happened 23 years ago. That first night, she could barely sleep. The mansion made strange noises, wood creaking, wind hitting, poorly closed windows, and sometimes a sound that could be footsteps or could be her imagination. At 3 in the morning, she got up to get water and was certain she saw a light on downstairs. A shadow passed by the library window. David Cameron wasn't sleeping either. The next morning, Hope showed her her duties. Ellie would be responsible for cleaning the bedrooms on the second floor, all empty and dusty, and a third floor that, according to the housekeeper, had been closed for years. "Never go up to the third floor without warning," Hope cautioned, handing her the keys. "And if you find any locked door, don't insist. There are certain things in this house that are better left in peace." Ellie took the bunch of keys and felt their weight in her hands. One was different from the others, older, more elaborate, made of dark iron that seemed to absorb the light around it. When she asked what it was for, Hope looked away. "That key has opened many things that should have remained closed," was all she said before walking away. Ellie began her first day of work with the feeling that she was entering a labyrinth from which she might never find her way out. And for the first time since arriving at the mansion, she wondered if her search for the truth was worth the price she might have to pay. Ellie spent the first 3 days cleaning the empty rooms on the second floor without even seeing David. Cameron's shadow. Hope had been specific. He worked in his office in the morning, lunched alone in the library, spent the afternoons on endless phone calls, and dined after 8, always in absolute silence. It was as if he were a ghost inhabiting his own house, but Ellie felt him. She felt when he was nearby the way the air seemed to become denser, more charged. She heard his firm footsteps downstairs, the occasional dragging of a chair, the dry thud of books being closed with more force than necessary. And sometimes, when she was cleaning the windows of the rooms, she had the uncomfortable feeling of being watched. On the 4th day, she finally saw him. It was noon when she went down to get cleaning supplies from the basement storage. As she came back up, she passed the library with the door ajar, and he was there. David Cameron with his back to her, tall, broad shoulders tensed under a white dress shirt, black hair slightly disheveled, as if he had run his hands through it several times. He was holding a glass of whiskey despite the hour and observing something through the window with an intensity that made Ellie stop in the hallway. He turned around. David Cameron's eyes were pitch black, but not empty. There was something burning in them, anger, pain, perhaps desire. Angular face, jaw marked by stubble that suggested sleepless nights, lips that seemed more accustomed to harsh words than smiles. He was 38, but appeared to carry the weight of a lifetime of disappointments. They looked at each other for seconds that seemed eternal. Ellie felt her heart race, not from fear, but from something much more dangerous. Recognition, as if in some inexplicable way she had always known that one day she would stand before this man. "You're the new housekeeper," he said, and his voice was deep, hoarse, with a slight accent that betrayed aristocratic origins. "Yes, sir, Ellie Morgan." She gave a small curtsy, hating herself for it but needing to maintain the charade. His eyes travelled over her in a way that made her skin tingle. It wasn't exactly a disrespectful look, but too intense, as if he were trying to decipher some mystery she carried. "Hope said you came from out of town." "From Riverside." "Why did you leave your city?" The question was direct, without small talk. Ellie took a deep breath before answering with a half-truth. "My mother died. I had nothing left keeping me there." Something changed in David's face when she mentioned her mother. A shadow passed over his eyes so quick that Ellie almost thought she had imagined it. "What was her name?" Ellie's heart almost stopped. "Why?" "Curiosity." But it wasn't curiosity. There was something more urgent in the way he asked the question. "Marianne." "Morgan," Ellie lied, using the surname her mother had adopted after her marriage. Her real name was Marianne Shaw, but Ellie didn't want to reveal that yet. David nodded slowly and took a sip of his whiskey. "You may go, and Ellie—" She stopped when she heard her name on his lips. "Avoid the third floor. There are things up there that it's better not to disturb." That night, Ellie couldn't get out of her head the way he had reacted when she mentioned her mother. There had been recognition there, she was sure. At 2 in the morning, she got up and walked silently down the hallway. The mansion was shrouded in shadows, but a sliver of light escaped from beneath the library door. She descended the stairs barefoot, each step a small betrayal of common sense. The door was ajar, and she could see David sitting in a leather armchair, still wearing the same clothes from the day, holding a glass that seemed to have been there for hours. On the low table beside him, photographs were scattered. Ellie approached as close as she could without being seen, and her blood froze when she recognized one of the photos. It was her mother, Marianne Shaw, at 20, hair loose, radiant smile, wearing a white dress that Ellie had never seen, and beside her, arm around her waist, a young man who was undeniably David Cameron, 16 years younger. They looked in love, genuinely, deeply in love. Ellie took a step back and stepped on a floorboard that groaned under her weight. David abruptly raised his head toward the sound, but she had already hidden behind a column in the hall. She heard his footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate, and held her breath. "I know you're there," he said, his voice echoing in the empty corridor. "Don't be afraid. Come out." Ellie closed her eyes, knowing she had no choice. She stepped out from behind the column and found him a few meters away, watching her with an expression that mixed irritation and something that could be fascination. "Can't sleep?" he asked, as if it were the most natural thing in the world for her to be wandering around the house in the early hours. "I'm sorry, I just wanted a glass of water. The kitchen is in the opposite direction." A bitter smile curved his lips. "You were spying on me." "No, You were." He took another step closer, and Ellie could smell the liquor on his breath, mixed with something purely masculine. "Why would a housekeeper do that?" "I'm not just a housekeeper," Ellie said before she could stop herself. David's eyes gleamed with renewed interest. "Then what are you?" Ellie looked at him directly, feeling she had reached a point of no return. "I'm Marianne Shaw's daughter." The whiskey glass slipped from David's hands and shattered on the marble floor, the sound echoing through the silent mansion like a gunshot. He looked at her as if she were a ghost, his face losing all color. "Marianne Shaw died 6 months ago," Ellie continued, seeing him stagger slightly. "But before she died, she told me about you." David leaned against the wall, as if he needed physical support to process her words. "What did she say?" "That you loved each other, that you abandoned her, and that maybe—" Ellie took a deep breath, gathering courage. "Maybe you're my father." The silence that followed Ellie's words was deafening. David remained motionless against the wall, his eyes fixed on her as if he were seeing a ghost. When he finally spoke, his voice came out strangled, almost inaudible. "That's impossible." "Why?" Ellie took a step forward, her heart pounding in her chest. "Because you never touched her? Because you were never intimate?" "Because Marianne was never pregnant by me." The words came out like a punch, loaded with pain that he seemed to have carried for decades. "She left me for another man. I discovered she was having an affair with my brother Andrew behind my back. When I confronted them both, she laughed in my face and said I was pathetic for believing she could love someone like me." Ellie felt the floor open beneath her feet. "That's not true." "No?" David laughed, a bitter sound that echoed down the hallway. "Then why did she run away with him that same night? Why did she never try to contact me again? Why, when she found out she was pregnant 3 months later, did she assume the child was his?" "Because someone lied to her," Ellie exclaimed, her voice broken with emotion. "Someone convinced her that you had rejected her, that you wanted nothing to do with her." David stared at her in silence for long seconds. Then, slowly, he moved away from the wall and walked to the library. Ellie followed him, stepping carefully between the shards of glass scattered on the floor. He picked up the photograph she had seen earlier and held it as if it were something sacred and cursed at the same time. "This photo was taken 2 weeks before she left me," he said, his voice controlled but tense. "We were planning our future. I was going to leave my wife, she was going to leave home. We were going to start a new life together." His fingers trembled slightly as he touched Marianne's face in the photo. "Then, one night, she simply disappeared. She left only a note saying she had found someone better. And you believed it? I saw her kissing my brother Andrew on the porch of his house the next day." David put the photo back on the table with extreme care. "She looked happy, happier than she had ever looked with me." Ellie felt tears burning her eyes. The story her mother had told was completely different, but there were details in David's version that made sense. The dates matched up. The presence of Andrew in her mother's life was real. She told me that you rejected her when you found out she was pregnant by someone else, Ellie murmured. She said Andrew came to her afterward and confirmed that you despised her, that you had called her a gold digger and an adventuress. Andrew said that? David's voice became dangerously low. According to my mother, yes. David closed his eyes and ran his hands through his hair, an expression of painful understanding forming on his face. My brother always hated me. I inherited the company, the house, our father's trust. He got a monthly allowance and a lot of bitterness. He opened his eyes and looked directly at Ellie. If he lied to Marianne, if he convinced her that I had rejected her. He got the two things he wanted most, Ellie completed, feeling a cold anger grow in her chest. To destroy you and to have her. But he didn't stay with her for long, did he? David asked. If you came from Riverside, if she married another man, my father, the man who raised me, was a good man. She met him when she was 3 months pregnant. He accepted her without questions and gave me his last name. Ellie wiped away a tear that escaped. She never spoke of you until the last days of her life. She said you were the love of her life, but that you had scorned her. David approached her slowly, as if afraid she might disappear if he moved too quickly. How old are you? 22. The timing works, he said, more to himself than to her. If she got pregnant the last week we spent together. Do you really think you could be my father? The question came out in a whisper. David studied her with an intensity that made Ellie feel naked. He was looking for similarities, familiar traits, anything that could confirm or deny the terrible and wonderful possibility that hung between them. Your eyes, he finally said. They have the same shape as my mother's, and your hands. He looked at Ellie's delicate hands. They're identical to Marianne's, but the long fingers are the Cameron family trait. Ellie extended her hand, and after hesitating for a moment, David took it. The touch was electric, a current that ran up her arm and lodged itself somewhere deep in her chest. If it's true, she said, her voice trembling, if you really are my father, then Andrew stole 22 years from us, David completed, his voice laden with contained fury. He stole your childhood from me, stole Marianne's chance to tell me the truth, stole the possibility of us being a family. They remained silent, still holding hands, processing the magnitude of what had been discovered. But there was something else in the air between them, something that Ellie couldn't name but that made her feel dangerously attracted to this man who could be her father. We need to do a DNA test, David finally said, letting go of her hand. Yes, Ellie agreed, but inside she felt a devastating conflict. Part of her desperately wanted David to be her father, to have finally found her true family. But another part, a part she tried to ignore, wished that he wasn't. Because the way her body reacted to his presence, the way her heart sped up when he looked at her, had nothing filial about it. Ellie, David said, and there was a strange urgency in his voice. Until we know the truth for certain, maybe it would be better for you to look for another job, another place to stay. Why? He looked into her eyes, and she saw in them the same conflict that was tearing apart her own chest. Because if you're not my daughter, he said slowly, then what I'm feeling for you right now is very, very dangerous. David's words echoed in the air between them like a dangerous confession. Ellie felt her blood boil in her veins, a mixture of fear and excitement that left her dizzy. She knew she should back away, agree with him, leave that house before it was too late, but her feet seemed glued to the marble floor. I'm not leaving, she said, surprising herself with the firmness in her own voice. I spent 6 months planning how to get to you. I'm not giving up now. Ellie, you said Andrew stole 22 years from us. If that's true, if he really manipulated my mother, then he needs to pay for it. She took a step forward, decreasing the distance between them. And if you're not my father, then what? Ellie looked directly into his dark eyes, seeing her own courage reflected there, mixed with something wild and hungry that made her stomach contract. Then maybe I came here for the right reason, but for the wrong person. The air in the library became charged like before a storm. David took a step back as if she were a flame too hot. "You don't know what you're saying." "Yes, I do." Ellie followed him, not letting him distance himself. "I know you haven't slept. Well, since I arrived here. I know you watch me through the windows when you think I'm not looking. I know that when you say my name, your voice changes." She stopped a few inches from him. "And I know that what you're feeling for me is the same thing I'm feeling for you." This is madness. Maybe, but it's real. David closed his eyes as if trying to control himself. When he opened them again, there was surrender in them. "Do you have any idea what you're doing to me?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Since the first day I saw you, something awakened in me, something I've kept dormant for years." "What have you?" "Kept dormant?" "The ability to feel." He extended his hand and touched her face with delicacy, as if she were made of crystal. "Since Marianne left me, since Isabella." He stopped abruptly, removing his hand as if he had been burned. "Who is Isabella?" Ellie asked, taking his hand and bringing it back to her face. "Someone I loved, someone who died because of me." "What do you mean?" David took a deep breath as if gathering courage to open a wound that had never completely healed. "Isabella Sanders. I met her 5 years after Marianne left me. She was a photographer, specialized in artistic portraits. Beautiful, intelligent, independent." His eyes became distant, lost in memories. "We got involved in an intense, almost obsessive way. She was different. She wasn't afraid of my darkness. In fact, she seemed to feed on it." "Did you live together?" "For 2 years. She had her own studio, but spent more time here than at her own place, especially on the 3rd floor. Ellie felt a shiver. "The 3rd floor that's locked?" Isabella transformed part of it into her personal space, a room that was both sanctuary and laboratory. She photographed there, painted, wrote. David stood before the window, observing the somber garden, and experimented with things. What kind of things? Power games, domination, submission, pain and pleasure mixed in ways I never imagined possible. He turned to Ellie, his eyes burning with an intensity that made her tremble. "Isabella taught me that there are ways to love that go far beyond what society considers acceptable." Ellie felt her mouth go dry. There was something in the way he spoke that awakened sensations she didn't even know existed. What happened to her? 6 years ago, Isabella started receiving threats. Someone knew about our relationship, about our practices. Intimate photographs arrived by mail with words cut out from magazines pasted on top. Always the same message: "Stop or you will pay." "Did you go to the police?" Isabella didn't want to. She said it would pass, but the threats became more specific, more violent. David clenched his fists. "In the last week of her life, she told me she had discovered who was behind the threats. She said it was someone close, someone who knew us well." "Andrew?" "I suspected, but I could never prove it. The morning she was going to tell me everything, they found her body in the lake on the property. Accidental death," said the report. "She had drunk too much and fallen into the water." "But you don't believe that?" "Isabella didn't drink. Not a drop. She had a phobia of losing control." David approached Ellie again. "Someone killed her, someone who wanted to separate us, and they succeeded." Ellie felt a wave of compassion mixed with something more primal. This man had lost 2 women. He loved both in traumatic ways, possibly at the hands of the same person. "That's why you live isolated. That's why I had given up feeling anything for anyone." He touched her hair, twirling a brown lock between his fingers. "Until you showed up." "David. You scare me, Ellie. You scare me because you make me want things I swore I'd never want again. You scare me because when I look at you, I see possibilities I thought were dead." He leaned in, bringing his face closer to hers. "And you scare me because if you are my daughter, I'll have to live the rest of my life knowing I felt this for you. And if I'm not?" "If you're not," he murmured, his lips inches from hers, "then I'll have to decide if I have the courage to love again, knowing that I could lose you too. Ellie closed her eyes, feeling his breath against her skin. She was on the threshold of something irreversible, and every fiber of her being screamed for her to take the final step. "David," she whispered, "what if I'm willing to take that risk?" Before he could answer, the sound of a car arriving at the entrance of the house echoed through the silence of the night. David moved away abruptly, all muscles tensed. "Damn," he muttered, looking through the window. "Andrew? Your brother? He only shows up here when he wants something, or when he's discovered something he shouldn't have." David looked at Ellie with urgency. "Go up to your room, now, and no matter what you hear, don't come down." "David? Now, Ellie!" She obeyed, but instead of going to her room, she stopped at the top of the stairs, hidden in the shadows. The front door opened with a bang, and a male voice, similar to David's but with an arrogant tone he's never had, echoed through the hall. "Little brother, it's been so long. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." Andrew Cameron entered. The mansion, as if he owned the place, which, Ellie quickly realized, was exactly the impression he wanted to give. Even hidden at the top of the stairs, she could see him clearly. He was a few years younger than David, perhaps 35. Brown, hair impeccably styled, expensive suit, predatory smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. There was a physical resemblance between the brothers, but where David carried a magnetic intensity, Andrew exuded a calculated arrogance. "Andrew," David said, his voice controlled, but Ellie could sense the tension beneath the surface. "What?" An unpleasant surprise. "What a warm reception," Andrew laughed, removing his leather gloves with deliberately slow movements. "Aren't you going to offer me a drink, or have you lost your good manners along with the rest of your sanity?" "What do you want?" Straight to the point as always, Andrew walked through the library as if he were appraising it. "I heard you hired a new housekeeper. Interesting choice considering your history with employees." Ellie saw David stiffen. "Leave Isabella out of this." "Ah, but it's impossible to leave dear Isabella out of any conversation about your romantic choices, isn't it? Especially considering how she ended up." Andrew picked up the photograph of Marianne that was still on the table, and now all this nostalgia. Marianne Shaw. Wow, you really can't forget the past, can you? Put that back in its place. Remember when she was alive? What a woman, wasn't she? So accessible. Andrew held the photo up to the light, as if examining a work of art. "Too bad she was so disappointed in you." "You know exactly why she was disappointed in me," David said, taking a threatening step toward his brother. "Because you made sure of it." Andrew smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant smile. "I merely told her the truth, that you were a married man who would never leave your wife for a low-level fling." "Lie. Was it?" "Funny, because when she came to me, afterward crying, saying you had been clear about not wanting anything serious, I just consoled an abandoned woman." Andrew put the photo back on the table with unnecessary force. "If she misinterpreted your intentions, it wasn't my fault." Ellie felt anger growing in her chest, like lava rising through a volcano. Every word from Andrew confirmed her suspicions. He had manipulated her mother, had deliberately destroyed the relationship between her and David. "You lied to her," David accused. "You said I called her a gold digger, that I laughed at her behind her back. Prove it." "I can't prove it because Marianne is dead." "Convenient, don't you think?" Andrew laughed, a sound that made Ellie shiver. "Death is always convenient for those who survive, little brother, as in the case of poor Isabella." The air in the library became charged with violence. Ellie saw David clench his fists, his entire body trembling with the effort to control himself. "You killed her." "Me? Please. I was in Miami the day of her death, remember? Business meeting, several witnesses, even the police confirmed my alibi." Andrew helped himself to whiskey at the bar, completely at ease. "Of course, that doesn't mean I didn't know that someone would eventually put an end to her situation." "Someone?" "Isabella was a complicated woman, David. She threatened people, made demands, had compromising photographs of several important figures in San Francisco." Andrew took a sip of his drink. "She even had some photos of you in quite artistic situations. Where are those photos? Destroyed, for the good of the family, of course. We couldn't let such sensitive material fall into the wrong hands. Andrew smiled again. Speaking of compromising situations, where is your new employee? Ellie, isn't it? I'd very much like to meet her. Ellie felt her blood freeze. How did he know her name? She's none of your business, David said. Oh, but she is. You see, I've been doing some research since I learned about her hiring. Ellie, Morgan from Riverside, daughter of Marianne Shaw and Paul Morgan. Very interesting, considering that Marianne Shaw was your lover 23 years ago. David didn't respond, but Ellie could see the tension growing in every line of his body. Mathematics is fascinating, isn't it? Andrew continued, clearly enjoying himself. Ellie is 22 years old. Marianne became pregnant with her exactly 9 months after leaving you. And now, by an amazing coincidence, her daughter appears at your door looking for employment. Coincidences happen. Not with me, little brother. Never with me. Andrew finished his drink and placed the glass on the table. You know, I always wondered if Marianne had lied to me about the paternity of the child. She was so desperate to forget you that she might have invented the story about the other man. Ellie had to cover her mouth to keep from making a sound. Andrew was admitting that he knew David could be her father. If that's what you think, David said slowly, why did you never tell me? Because it was more fun to let you suffer thinking you had lost the love of your life to another man. Andrew walked toward the door. But now that her daughter is here, living in your house, sleeping upstairs, well, things get interesting, don't they? What do you want, Andrew? I want you to sell this property to me for the price I offered 3 years ago. Never. Even if I tell that young lady up there exactly what kind of man you are, the kind of things you did with Isabella, in that locked room on the 3rd floor, the kind of appetites you have. David stood motionless. You won't do that? No. Imagine poor Ellie discovering that the man who might be her biological father has very unfatherly fantasies about her. Andrew smiled cruelly. Because you do, don't you? I can see it in the way you look toward the stairs when you talk to me. Ellie felt as if she'd been punched in the stomach. He knew she was there. Come down, Ellie, Andrew called casually. No need to hide any more. For a moment, Ellie considered, pretending she wasn't there, but she knew it would be useless. Slowly she descended the stairs, feeling the eyes of both men following her every move. When she reached the foot of the stairs, Andrew examined her from head to toe with a familiarity that made her feel dirty. Truly remarkable, he said. You have the Cameron family eyes, but the rest is pure Marianne. He approached her, completely ignoring David's threatening posture. Tell me, dear, did you come here looking for a father or looking for something more? Andrew, David growled a warning. It's a simple question, Andrew continued, now just a few meters from Ellie. Because, you see, if you're looking for a father, I have some devastating news for you. And if you're looking for something more, well, I also have interesting news. Ellie looked from Andrew to David, feeling like prey between two predators. But there was something in Andrew's eyes. That made her gather courage. What news? She asked, surprising both men. Andrew smiled like a snake about to strike. The first is that there's a very real possibility that David is indeed your father. The second, he made a dramatic pause, is that it doesn't matter one bit for what he wants to do with you. Andrew's words hung in the air like a death sentence. Ellie felt the world spin around her, but she forced herself to remain standing, to look him directly in the eyes. You're lying, she said, her voice steadier than she expected. Am I? Andrew pulled an envelope from the inside pocket of his jacket, then explained this. He extended the envelope toward Ellie, but David intercepted it, snatching it from his brother's hands before she could touch it. Don't you dare, David hissed. What's in that envelope? Ellie asked, shifting her gaze between the two men. Photographs, Andrew answered with evident satisfaction. Photographs that Isabella took of you two 3 days ago, through the library window. Photographs that show exactly the kind of tension that exists between a possible father and his possible daughter. Ellie felt the blood drain from her face. Isabella has been dead for 6 years. Ah yes, small slip of mine. Andrew smiled without showing any regret. Someone took these photographs, someone who has an interest in documenting the delicate situation that has developed in this house. David opened the envelope with trembling hands. Ellie saw his expression change from fury to absolute horror. "Son of a bitch," he muttered. "May I see?" Ellie extended her hand. "No," David said immediately. "David, I need to see." Reluctantly, he handed her one of the photographs. It was, in black and white, taken through the library window the previous night. It showed Ellie and David very close together, his hands on her face, their bodies leaning toward each other in a posture that was undeniably intimate. To anyone who saw that image, it would look exactly like what Andrew was insinuating. "Who took this?" Ellie asked, her voice hoarse. "Someone who works for me," Andrew responded casually. "Someone who has been documenting every interesting movement in this house for weeks." "You've been spying on me for weeks?" "I'm protecting the family's interests and my own." Andrew walked to the window, observing the garden as if he were the lord of everything he saw. "You see, Ellie, this property is worth a lot of money, and I need it for a development I have in mind. My brother, however, has stubbornly refused to sell it. And you think you can blackmail me to convince him?" "Blackmail is such an ugly word." Andrew turned to her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I prefer to think of it as incentive. See, if these photographs reach the right hands, say some gossip papers, some social networks, the Cameron family's reputation will be completely destroyed. And yours too, of course." "I don't care about my reputation," Ellie said, surprising herself with the truth of that statement. "No? What about your mother's memory? Because I also have some interesting information about Marianne Shaw, things she did during the month she spent with me after leaving David, things that perhaps you wouldn't want to become public." Ellie felt as if she'd been punched in the stomach. "What do you mean?" "Your mother was an adventurous woman. During the time we spent together, she got involved in some activities that the conservative society of Riverside would find very shocking." Andrew approached her again. "I have photographs, videos, letters, enough documentation to completely ruin the memory you have of her." "You're sick," David said, taking a threatening step toward his brother. "I'm practical," Andrew corrected. "And I'm offering a simple solution for everyone. David sells the property. I destroy all the compromising material, and you two can go on with your lives without worrying about scandals." "And if I don't sell?" David asked. "Then tomorrow morning all of America will know that David Cameron, the reclusive businessman, is having an affair with a young woman who might be his own daughter, and that her mother was a woman of questionable morals who got involved with two brothers at the same time." Andrew checked the expensive watch on his wrist. "I'm sure the press will love the story." Ellie looked at David, seeing the desperation in his eyes. He was cornered, and they both knew it. "How much time do you give us to decide?" she asked. "Until noon tomorrow. That's enough time to do a quick DNA test if you want to be sure about paternity before making a decision." Andrew walked toward the door. "Oh, and one thing, Ellie. If you try to run away or if you think you can simply ignore my demands, remember that I have eyes everywhere, and I won't hesitate to use everything I have." He stopped at the door and turned one last time. "Oh, and David, that locked room on the 3rd floor. Maybe it's time to show Ellie what really happened there. Complete honesty can be liberating." With those words, Andrew left, leaving Ellie and David alone in the heavy silence of the library. For long minutes, neither said anything. Ellie stared at the photograph in her hands, trying to process the magnitude of the situation they were in. David stood motionless by the window, his hands clenched into fists. "Is he telling the truth?" Ellie finally asked. "About the room on the 3rd floor?" David closed his eyes. "Partially." "What does that mean?" "It means that Isabella and I had an intense relationship. We explored boundaries that most people never even imagine." He turned to her, his eyes full of painful vulnerability. "But it was never about violence or abuse. It was about trust, about finding pleasure in surrender, in complete submission." Ellie felt a wave of heat course through her body. It wasn't shock or disgust as it should have been. It was curiosity, desire. "And you feel that for me?" The question came out before she could stop herself. David looked at her as if she had just undressed in front of him. Ellie, answer me. After everything that happened today, after all the lies and manipulations, I deserve complete honesty. David took a deep breath, like a man about to jump off a cliff. Yes, he said simply. Since the first day you arrived here, I've been thinking things that a father should never think about a daughter. I've dreamed of you in ways that make me question my own sanity. He approached her slowly. And with each passing day, it becomes harder to pretend that what I feel for you is something paternal. Even knowing I might be your daughter, especially knowing that. He stopped a few inches from her. Does that make me a monster? Ellie looked into his dark eyes, seeing the internal struggle that was tearing him apart. Slowly, she extended her hand and touched his face, feeling the rough beard under her fingers. I don't know, she whispered, but if you're a monster, then so am I, because I feel the same way about you. The touch was like lighting a match near gasoline. David moaned softly and covered her hand with his, pressing it against his face. This will destroy us, he murmured. Maybe, Ellie said, raising her other hand to his chest, feeling the racing heart under his shirt. But Andrew is already destroying us anyway. David looked at her intensely, as if he were memorizing every detail of her face. Ellie, he said, his voice laden with desire and desperation, if we're going to destroy ourselves, at least let's do it our way. David's words echoed between them like a promise and a threat. Ellie felt the air leave her lungs when he inclined his face toward hers, but at the last second, he abruptly pulled away, as if he had been burned. No, he said, running his hands through his hair in desperation. I can't do this to you, not before we know the truth. David. Ellie, you don't understand. If you are my daughter and I touch you, there's no going back, there's no forgiveness, there's no way to live with that. He walked to the other side of the library, putting physical distance between them. We need to do that test, now. Ellie knew he was right, but every fiber of her being screamed against the separation. How will we get a result so quickly? I have contacts, private clinics that do this kind of thing discreetly. David picked up the phone. I can get the result in a few hours. While he made the necessary calls, Ellie went up to the 3rd floor for the first time. Hope had told her never to go up there without warning, but now she needed to see for herself what David and Isabella had shared in that space. The 3rd floor corridor was narrower than the others, with only 3 doors. 2 were open, revealing empty rooms covered in dust. The 3rd was locked, and Ellie knew that was the one that held the secrets. She tried all the keys in the bunch that Hope had given her until she found the right one, the dark iron key that seemed to absorb the light around it. The door opened, with a low moan, releasing an aroma of dried jasmine and something deeper, more intimate. Ellie turned on the light, and what she saw made her stop at the entrance, her heart racing. The room was both beautiful and disturbing. The walls were covered with black and white photographs, artistic portraits of a beautiful woman she presumed to be Isabella, but also of David. Images that captured moments of vulnerability and intense passion. Some of the photos showed bodies, intertwined in ways that Ellie had never seen, shadows and light creating an erotic dance that was impossible to ignore. In the center of the room was a canopy bed, the sheets still perfectly made, as if they were waiting for the return of their occupants. An antique desk was covered with brushes, paints, and sketchbooks. Ellie approached and leafed through one of them, discovering detailed sketches of male and female bodies in intimate poses. But it was what she found in the desk drawer that really shocked her. A diary, with the delicate handwriting of a woman, and pages describing in explicit detail the relationship between Isabella and David. It wasn't vulgar pornography, but a deep exploration of the psychology of desire, power, surrender. David teaches me things about myself that I didn't know existed, one entry said. When he dominates me, it's not about physical strength. It's about absolute trust, about allowing myself to be vulnerable in a way I never thought possible. Another entry, more recent. Someone is watching us. I'm sure of it. Photographs arrived. In the mail today. Photos of us two in the garden last week. David says it's just an opportunistic photographer, but I know it's more than that. Someone wants to separate us, someone who knows us well. Ellie quickly turned the pages, looking for more clues, when she found an entry that made her blood freeze. Andrew was here today when David wasn't. He said terrible things about our relationship, tried to convince me that David was just using me. But the worst was when he approached me, the way he looked at me as if I were an object he wanted to possess. He said that if I didn't end things with David, he would show the photographs to everyone, that he would destroy the family's reputation. But when I said I didn't care, he smiled in a way that made me realize he has many more cards up his sleeve. The E. Last entry in the diary was written in a trembling hand, clearly in a state of despair. I discovered who's behind the threats. It's worse than I imagined. It's not just Andrew. He has a partner, someone I trusted. I'm going to tell David everything tomorrow. If something happens to me, I want him to know it wasn't an accident. The truth is in the safe behind the Van Gogh painting in the library. The combination is the date of our first meeting, 03-15-12. Ellie closed the diary with trembling hands. Isabella had discovered who was threatening her and died before she could tell David. And more importantly, there was evidence hidden in the library. She ran down the stairs and found David still on the phone. When he hung up, she showed him the diary. I found this in Isabella's room, she said, breathing heavily. She discovered who was behind the threats, and she left evidence. David quickly read the last pages of the diary, his expression becoming increasingly somber. Son of a bitch, he muttered. She tried to warn me and I didn't pay attention. David, she mentioned a safe behind the Van Gogh painting. They ran to the library and David removed the painting from the wall, revealing a small built-in safe. With nervous fingers, he typed in the combination 03-15-12. The safe opened with a soft click. Inside were photographs, documents, and a flash drive. David picked up the photographs first, and his face paled. What is it? Ellie asked. Silently, he showed her the images. They were photographs of Andrew with various men in compromising situations. Politicians, businessmen, prominent public figures. But they weren't just intimate photographs. They were images that suggested blackmail, corruption, illegal business. Andrew was using the same tactics with me that he uses with these people, David said, his voice loaded with disgust. Isabella discovered that he has a blackmail scheme that involves half of San Francisco's elite. Ellie picked up one of the documents. It was a contract signed by Andrew and someone named Richard Mendez, establishing the terms of a partnership for forced acquisition of high-value properties through psychological pressure and compromising material. He doesn't just want this house, Ellie realized. He wants the land for some illegal development, and he's willing to destroy anyone who stands in the way. David connected the flash drive to the library computer. The screen filled with files, more photographs, audio recordings, detailed spreadsheets of payments and blackmail. This is enough to put him in prison for the rest of his life, David said. Isabella gathered enough evidence to completely destroy him. Then why didn't she do it? Because she loved me, David answered simply, and she knew that exposing Andrew would mean exposing the entire family. It would mean I would lose everything too. They remained silent for a moment, processing the magnitude of what they had discovered. Then Ellie took David's hand. What are we going to do? First, we're going to wait for the DNA test result. Then, David looked at her with a determination that made her heart race. Then, we're going to destroy my brother the same way he destroyed Isabella. What about the photographs he has of us? David smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant smile. Let him publish them. After what we're going to reveal about him, nobody will pay attention to another sex scandal. They'll be too busy trying to understand how he managed to blackmail half the government. David's phone rang. It was the clinic. Hello? Yes, I'm waiting. I understand. Are you sure? Very well, thank you. He hung up and looked at Ellie for long seconds before speaking. The result arrived, he said, his voice tense. And? David took a deep breath, as if preparing to jump off a cliff. You're not my daughter, Ellie. We have no blood relationship. The relief and desire that exploded inside Ellie were so intense that she had to hold onto the table to keep from falling. David approached her slowly, his eyes burning with a hunger that had been repressed for days. "This means," she began. "This means," David said, taking her face between his hands, "that I can do everything I've been thinking about doing with you since the moment I saw you." This time, when he leaned his face toward hers, Ellie didn't back away, and when their lips finally met, it was as if the whole world caught fire. The kiss was everything Ellie had imagined and more. David kissed her like a hungry man, as if he had been holding back for an eternity and could finally free himself. His hands intertwined in her hair, pulling her closer, as if he couldn't get enough of her taste, her warmth, the surrender she offered so freely. When they finally separated, they were both breathing heavily. David rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if he were trying to control himself. "Ellie," he murmured, his voice hoarse, "if we stay here, I won't be able to stop." "Then don't stop," she whispered, surprising herself with her own audacity. His eyes opened, dark as night, burning with an intensity that made her stomach contract with desire. "You don't know what you're asking for." "Yes, I do." Ellie slid her hands over his chest, feeling the tense muscles under his shirt. "I read Isabella's diary. I saw the photographs. I know what kind of man you are when it comes to this. And you're not afraid." Ellie looked directly into his eyes. "Should I be?" In response, David grabbed her by the waist and lifted her, setting her down sitting on the library table. The papers and evidence scattered, but neither of them cared. He positioned himself between her legs, his hands firm on her waist, his body pressed against hers in a way that left no doubt about his intentions. "I'm a man who likes control, Ellie," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I like to command, to decide the pace, the intensity. I like it when a woman surrenders completely to me. And if I want to surrender..." His hands slowly moved up the sides of her body, stopping just below her breasts. "Then you need to be sure. Because once we start this, once I have you completely, there will be no going back." Ellie felt a shiver run down her entire spine. There was something in the way he spoke that was both threatening and exciting. "David," she said, placing her hands on his face, "for weeks I thought you might be my father. For weeks I fought against what I felt for you, hating myself for desiring someone who could be my family." She leaned forward, her lips almost touching his. "Now that I know the truth, now that I know there's nothing wrong with what I feel, do you really think I'm going to back away?" David moaned softly and kissed her again, this time with more urgency, more need. His hands found the buttons of her blouse, opening them one by one with a deliberate slowness that was driving her crazy. "Not here," he murmured against her lips when her blouse fell to the floor. "Not in the library where my brother just threatened us." He lifted her in his arms as if she weighed nothing and carried her up the stairs. But instead of going to her room or to his, he went up to the third floor, to Isabella's room. "David," Ellie whispered when he set her down in front of the canopy bed, "are you sure?" "Isabella would love this," he said, his fingers tracing the line of Ellie's. She always said this room needed new life, new love." He lit some candles scattered across the dresser, creating a soft golden light that danced on the walls covered with photographs. Then he approached Ellie slowly, like a predator who doesn't want to frighten his prey. "Are you sure you want this?" he asked one last time, his hands poised on her waist. In response, Ellie began to unbutton his shirt, her fingers trembling slightly, but determined. When the shirt fell to the floor, revealing his muscular chest, the scars that told stories she didn't yet know, she ran her hands over his warm skin. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," she said. It was all David needed to hear. What followed was a careful and intense exploration. David undressed her slowly, kissing every inch of skin he revealed, murmuring words in her ear that made her body burn with desire. His hands were both gentle and possessive, as if he were mapping territory that now belonged to him. When they finally lay down on the bed, intertwined in the golden candlelight, Ellie understood what Isabella had written in her diary. It wasn't just about physical pleasure. It was about absolute trust, about allowing oneself to be vulnerable with someone, about finding strength in surrender. David moved above her with an intensity that took her breath away. Each touch, each kiss, each movement was deliberate, calculated, to take her beyond her limits. And when she thought she couldn't feel more, he found new ways to make her tremble, to make her beg, to make her surrender completely. "You're mine now," he murmured in her ear as he moved inside her, and the words sent waves of pleasure throughout her body. "Yours," she repeated, and when she said it, she knew it was true in every possible sense. Afterward, when they lay intertwined, their breathing slowly returning to normal, Ellie traced the scars on David's chest with her fingertips. "How did you get these scars?" "Some are from fights when I was younger and stupid," he said, taking her hand and kissing the palm. "Others are from accidents during my business adventures. And this one," she touched a long scar that went from his chest to his shoulder. David's face hardened. "That's from Andrew." Ellie raised herself on her elbow to look at him better. "He hurt you? When we were 15 and 17, we fought over a girl. He grabbed a piece of broken glass and—" David shrugged. "He was always violent when he couldn't get what he wanted. That's why you don't trust him. That's why I should have killed him a long time ago," David said, and there was a coldness in his voice that made Ellie shiver. "David. He killed Isabella, Ellie. It may not have been with his own hands, but he orchestrated everything. And now he's trying to destroy us too." David sat up in bed, his muscles tense. "I won't let him hurt you." Ellie knelt behind him and wrapped her arms around his chest, resting her face on his back. "Then what are we going to do?" "We're going to use the evidence Isabella left. We're going to expose everything he did, all the crimes, all the blackmail." David turned toward her. "But first, we're going to make him believe he won." "What do you mean?" "Tomorrow morning I'm going to call him and say I agree to sell the property." David smiled, but it was a predatory smile. "I'll set up a meeting to sign the papers, and, while he's here celebrating his victory, we're going to deliver all the evidence to the police. What if he tries to hurt us?" "He won't have a chance." David kissed her forehead softly. "Trust me, Ellie. After tomorrow, Andrew will never be able to threaten anyone again." Ellie nodded, but part of her was still worried. Andrew had proven to be smarter and more dangerous than anyone imagined. Would it really be so easy to defeat him? As if he could read her thoughts, David pulled her back into his arms. "Stop thinking," he murmured, kissing her neck. "We have tonight. Let's enjoy it." And as he kissed her again, Ellie tried to push away the dark thoughts, but deep down, a voice whispered that Andrew Cameron would not be defeated so easily, and that the real fight was just beginning. Tentar novamente, continue editor plotted narrative translation and story progression strategy. I need to continue translating the story from Portuguese to English, keeping the original narrative style and length while adapting character and location names to American settings. I'll pick up where I left off in the previous section. It seems we're in the middle of a dramatic story about Ellie and David, who have discovered they're not related by blood and have given in to their mutual attraction. They've also discovered evidence of blackmail and corruption by David's brother Andrew, who killed David's former lover Isabella. They plan to trick Andrew into thinking he's won by agreeing to sell the property, then expose his crimes to the police. I'll continue translating the next section of the story, maintaining the tone, pacing, and emotional intensity of the original while using American English style and idioms. Ellie woke up in David's arms with the first rays of sunlight, filtering through the curtains of Isabella's room. For a moment, she allowed herself to simply exist in that space between sleep and wakefulness, feeling the warmth of his body against hers, his steady breathing on her neck. For the first time in months, she felt complete. But reality soon imposed itself. Today was the day they would confront Andrew once and for all. "Good morning," David murmured against her ear, his voice still husky with sleep. "How did you know I was awake?" "Your breathing changed." He softly kissed her bare shoulder. "Besides, I can feel you thinking. Your muscles tense when you worry." Ellie turned in his arms to face him. Even with his disheveled hair and morning stubble, David was devastatingly handsome. but there was something different in his eyes this morning, a cold determination that made her shiver. "Have you called Andrew?" "An hour ago. He'll be here at 2 o'clock to sign the papers." David caressed her face. "The police will come at 3. Enough time for him to incriminate himself even further." What if he suspects something? He won't. Andrew has always underestimated my intelligence. He thinks I'm driven purely by emotion. David smiled, but there was no warmth in that smile. Today he'll discover how wrong he is. They dressed in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Ellie felt a mixture of anticipation and fear growing in her chest. As much as she trusted David, she knew Andrew was unpredictable and dangerous. While they had coffee in the kitchen, Hope observed them with poorly disguised curiosity. The housekeeper had worked for the Cameron family for decades and clearly sensed that something had changed in the dynamics of the house. "Mr. David," she finally said, serving him more coffee, "may I ask a question?" "Of course, but will Mr. Andrew be coming here today?" "Yes, why do you ask?" Hope exchanged a nervous look with Ellie. "It's just that, well, he always makes me uncomfortable. And last night after he left, I could have sworn I saw someone in the garden, near the library windows." Ellie felt her blood freeze. "Someone was spying on us?" "I'm not sure. It could have been shadows or my imagination." Hope nervously wiped her hands on her apron. "But I thought I should mention it." David and Ellie exchanged concerned looks. If Andrew was still monitoring the house, it meant he might know about the evidence they had found. "Hope," David said calmly, "I need you to leave early today. In fact, why don't you take a few days off? Go visit your sister in Santa Cruz." "But sir," "I insist, and take your bag right now." Hope must have detected the urgency in his voice because she quickly nodded and went to get her things. Within a few minutes, they heard her car leaving through the main entrance. "Do you think Andrew knows about the evidence?" Ellie asked. "As soon as they were alone. If he suspects anything, he'll try to get ahead of us." David stood up abruptly. "We need to move the material to a safe place." They rushed to the library and began collecting all the documents, photographs, and the flash drive from the safe. David placed them in a sturdy leather folder. "I'm going to take this to the bank right now. Deposit it in a safety deposit box," he said. "If something goes wrong today—" "Nothing will go wrong," Ellie interrupted, but her own voice sounded uncertain. David pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "Ellie, if for any reason things get out of control today, I want you to run. Don't try to help me, don't try to be a hero, just run and go straight to the police." "David, no, promise me." Ellie looked into his eyes and saw genuine fear there. Not fear for himself, but for her. "I promise," she said, even knowing it was a lie. David left for the bank, leaving Ellie alone in the mansion. She tried to occupy herself by organizing the rooms, but her mind wouldn't stop racing. What if Andrew arrived early? What if he brought other people? What if this was all an elaborate trap? At 11 in the morning, the phone rang. Ellie hesitated before answering. "Hello?" "Ellie, dear." It was Andrew's voice, syrupy and fake. "How are you on this beautiful morning?" "What do you want?" "Andrew." "Straight to the point, just like David." He chuckled softly. "I just want to confirm our meeting this afternoon. 2 o'clock, isn't it?" "That's what David said." "Perfect. Oh, and Ellie, I hope you two enjoyed last night. From the photographs my photographer took, it seems it was very intense." Ellie felt her stomach drop. "What photographs?" "Oh, my dear, you don't think I would stop monitoring you just because I said I would, do you? I have beautiful images of you two in Isabella's room. Very artistic, I must admit." "You're sick." "I'm efficient. And now, in addition to the original material, I have evidence that you profaned poor dead Isabella's sanctuary." Andrew made a theatrical pause. "I must say it will add a quite dramatic touch to the story when it's published." Ellie hung up the phone with trembling hands. Andrew was always one step ahead, always prepared for any contingency. When David returned from the bank, she told him about the call. His face hardened like stone. "Son of a bitch," he muttered. "He's playing with us." "David, maybe we should cancel the meeting, run away, use the evidence from a distance." "No." His voice was firm. If we run now, he'll publish everything he has on us and still get away with it. I won't let that happen. But if he has more photographs, then we'll make sure he doesn't have a chance to use them. David went to a cabinet in the library and took out something that made Ellie gasp. It was a pistol. David, no. It's just a precaution, he said, checking if the gun was loaded. I won't use it unless absolutely necessary. You can't kill your brother. I can if he tries to hurt us. David tucked the gun in the holster under his jacket. Ellie, Andrew isn't just a common blackmailer. He's a sociopath. If he feels cornered, he's capable of anything. At 2 o'clock sharp, the sound of Andrew's car echoed at the entrance of the mansion. Ellie watched through the window as he got out of the vehicle. Alone, apparently, but she knew that didn't mean anything. David opened the door before Andrew even rang the doorbell. "Little brother," Andrew said with a radiant smile, carrying an executive folder. "Ready to do business?" "Come in." They headed to the library where David had prepared a table with the fake sale papers. Ellie stood near the window trying to appear calm. "Where's the evidence you found in Isabella's safe?" Andrew asked casually as he sat down. David showed no surprise. "What evidence?" "Please, David. You really think I don't know everything? That happens in this house? My photographer saw you opening the safe last night." Andrew opened his folder and took out more photographs. "I even have very clear images of you examining my side businesses." Ellie saw David stiffen almost imperceptibly. "That evidence was delivered to the police this morning," David lied smoothly. "Oh, was it?" Andrew smiled like a predator who had just cornered his prey. "Because I called my contact at the police department an hour ago. They didn't receive anything related to me today." The silence in the library became as dense as a stretched rope about to snap. "You know," Andrew continued, leafing through the photographs, "initially I just wanted this property. But now I realize that you two have become a much bigger problem. A problem that needs a more permanent solution." It was then that Ellie saw 2 men approaching silently through the garden window. Large men with hard faces, clearly not social visitors. "David," she said softly, but he had already noticed. In a fluid movement, he drew the pistol and pointed it at Andrew. "Send your thugs away," he said calmly. Andrew laughed as if it were the funniest thing in the world. "Oh, David, you really think I would come here unprotected? They're not thugs, they're police officers." His words were confirmed when the library door opened with a bang and 2 men entered, showing badges. "David Cameron," one of them said, "you're under arrest for threatening with a firearm and suspicion of homicide." "What homicide?" Ellie shouted. "Isabella Sanders, of course," Andrew answered with false sympathy. "My dear brother finally confessed." Ellie's world collapsed in seconds. David was handcuffed and taken away by the officers, while Andrew watched with evident satisfaction. She tried to follow them, but Andrew grabbed her by the arm. "Let me go," she screamed, trying to break free. "Calm down, dear. Now it's just us two." Andrew pulled her back into the library, closing the door behind them. "I can finally have that conversation we've been postponing. You set this all up. You forged a confession." Forged? What an ugly word. Andrew helped himself to some whiskey as if nothing had happened. "Let's say I creatively interpreted some recorded conversations. David talking about guilt, about not being able to protect Isabella. It wasn't difficult to edit the recordings to make it sound like a confession." Ellie felt nauseous. "You're a monster. I'm a businessman, and now that David is out of the way, we can discuss your future." Andrew slowly approached her. "You see, Ellie, I always knew you weren't David's daughter. I always knew because I was there when your mother got pregnant." "What do you mean?" "Marianne was pregnant when she left David, but not by some random man." Andrew smiled, and there was something rotten in that smile. "She was pregnant by me." Ellie felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. "That's a lie." "It's the truth. Marianne and I had an affair while she was with David. She got pregnant, and when she told me, I convinced her to run away. I told her David would never accept her with another man's child." Andrew drank slowly. "Of course, I didn't want to assume paternity either, so I sent her away." "You?" Ellie could barely form words. "You're my father." Biologically, yes, although I've never had any interest in playing the role. Andrew set the glass on the table. But now that you've grown up and become such an attractive woman, perhaps we can establish a different kind of relationship. The disgust Ellie felt was so intense that she had to hold onto the wall to keep from vomiting. You're sick. I'm practical. With David in prison, this property will end up being auctioned. I'll buy it for a fraction of its value, and you. He moved closer. You'll stay with me, voluntarily. Never. Oh, yes, you will. Because if you don't, I'll publish all the photographs I have of you and David. I'll tell the world that you profaned the place where Isabella died. I'll completely destroy any chance of a normal life you might have. Ellie looked around desperately, searching for a way out, for something she could use as a weapon. It was then that her eyes fixed on the drawer of the desk where David kept important papers, the same drawer where he had placed a second copy of the evidence he hadn't taken to the bank. You win, she said, forcing her voice to sound defeated. But can I at least get my things, my family photographs? Of course, dear. We have time. Ellie walked slowly to the desk, keeping her back to Andrew. With trembling fingers, she opened the drawer and found what she was looking for, not just the evidence, but also a digital recorder that David used for business meetings. A recorder that had been on during the entire conversation. Andrew, she said, turning slowly, there's one thing you should know. What? David wasn't the only one who didn't trust you. Ellie held up the recorder for him to see. This entire conversation was recorded. Your confession about being my father, about blackmailing Marianne, about forging evidence against David. Everything. Andrew's face changed completely. The mask of civility fell away, revealing something fierce and dangerous underneath. Give me that, he growled, advancing toward her. No. Ellie ran to the other side of the table. Not before you call the police and tell the truth about David. You don't understand who you're dealing with, Andrew said, his voice low and threatening. I killed Isabella. I'll kill you too if necessary. So you confess. Confess what? To whom? You think anyone will believe the word of a housekeeper against mine? Andrew laughed, but there was no humor in it. Besides, you won't leave this house alive to tell anyone. It was then that Ellie heard it, the sound of cars arriving at the entrance, many cars. Andrew heard it too and ran to the window. His face paled when he saw the number of police vehicles surrounding the property. How? David may not have delivered the evidence to the police this morning, Ellie said, smiling for the first time in hours, but he certainly gave a copy to the family lawyer with instructions to deliver it if anything happened to him. The library door opened with a bang and police officers entered, but these weren't the same ones who had taken David. These were federal agents. Andrew Cameron, the federal agent announced, you're under arrest for homicide, racketeering, blackmail, corruption of public officials, and a list of other crimes that will take all day to read. As Andrew was being handcuffed, he looked at Ellie with pure hatred. You haven't won anything, he spat. David will still be tried for Isabella's murder. Actually, no, the agent said. The recordings your daughter provided us include your detailed confession about how you orchestrated Isabella Sanders' death. David Cameron is being released as we speak. Ellie almost collapsed with relief. 3 weeks later, Ellie was in the garden of the mansion, which finally seemed alive again. Hope had returned and was tending to the roses with renewed enthusiasm. The case against Andrew was progressing, and the lawyers assured them he would spend the rest of his life in prison. What are you thinking about? David asked, approaching from behind and wrapping his arms around her. About how everything changed so quickly, Ellie replied, leaning back against his chest. A month ago, I didn't even know if you were my father or not. Now, you're stuck with me forever, he completed, kissing the top of her head. Is that so? Ellie turned in his arms, smiling. And who said I want to be stuck? I did, David responded, and there was a possessiveness in his voice that made her stomach contract with desire. And what I say in this house goes. Oh, really? And what if I disagree? Then we'll have to find ways to reach an agreement, he murmured against her lips before kissing her. When they separated, Ellie looked at the mansion, which no longer seemed somber or threatening, but like a home. David, she said suddenly. Thank you. For what? For letting me find you. For not giving up on us even when everything seemed impossible. Ellie touched his face gently. For showing me that sometimes the best things in life are born from the darkest places. David took her hand and kissed it. Ellie Morgan, he said solemnly, you saved my life in every possible way. And you saved mine. As the sun set over San Francisco, painting the sky with shades of gold and red, Ellie and David remained embraced in the garden. They had gone through betrayal, blackmail, imprisonment, and devastating discoveries about their families. They had faced the possibility of being related, the certainty of not being, and finally the revelation of a paternity they never imagined. But in the end, it all came down to this: two wounded hearts that found each other in the darkness and chose to heal one another. Two souls who discovered that true love isn't born from perfection, but from the courage to accept each other's imperfections. Isabella's room on the 3rd floor would remain as it was, a memorial not just to her, but to the journey that brought Ellie and David to this moment. Sometimes they went up there, not to relive the past, but to remember where they had started and how far they had come. And as the first stars began to appear in the dark sky, Ellie knew she had finally found her place in the world. It wasn't the place she had imagined when she left Riverside with her few suitcases and many secrets.